I wish I could say that I've learned these lessons well, or have a box of tools gained from only successful life races all run well. No, that's not my story. But I can share the well-worn lessons of holding on when I thought I couldn't, taking another step when I thought my knees would surely buckle, and pressing forward with only enough light to see the path one step at a time. These are lessons of endurance taught by a father who brought hope every morning, who caught each tear that I shed, and who has given me a sense of security that reaches beyond my understanding. Thus, I must focus my faith. So it's been a couple of weeks since we were together at the first live taping of Fearless Conversations. And I just wanted to invite you into my devotion time. And I have been reading over some of the questions and cards that you shared with me in our journey and our conversation that night. And there were a group of cards that many of the same type of question or wondering kept showing up, from how do I stay focused and not allow life's disruptions to get in the way? How do I focus on what God is asking me to do? How can I become consistent and stay focused? Do you hear the pattern that's showing up? A lot of questions around how do we stay focused? And when I think about that question and our conversation on faith, it drew me to a question that Andy Andrews asked in one of her devotions. And when we're battling with focus, it may sting a little bit, but she asked, how free do you actually want to be? Are you willing to do the work that's necessary to be free? Or is it that you actually want somebody else to do the work for you? And is it that you actually want to be free? Or is it that you're actually more in love with just the idea? Ouch. Right? That actually is where I started when I looked at the cards and I thought about our conversation on being free. When I think about what it takes to be focused, to zero in on purpose, to get really clear about what I'm supposed to be doing when I'm searching for those times to show up fully for God, it starts with, am I willing to put in the work? When something's distracting me, when I allow or I make the choice to allow that distraction to consume me, I'm actually deciding that distraction is more important than my call. And so it starts with, am I willing to pause and be intentional about the pause? Not just take for granted that the pause will happen, but that it actually has to become a part of my intentional practice. So when I think about focus, it actually begins with, do I plan my time? We had this conversation that night. 86,400 seconds per day. I asked you about money, and many of you went right into talking about how you would spend $86,400. But I also then flipped it and said, if it's time, isn't it just as valuable? You can get $1 back, but when that moment is gone, you don't get that moment back. So when we want to talk about how do I get focused, I'm asking you, are you willing to do what's necessary to manage your time? To pay attention to what's important? How do you start your day? Do you actually schedule out time to be still? In the book, we talk about, in that chapter of focusing your faith, we talk about first pausing. Are you willing to pause and identify, I need this time? Being still is not being lazy. Being still is an opportunity for you to refill you. So often we'll talk about the prayers that we are asking of God. But what if He's asking you to just be still and listen? Can you be still? What is it that keeps you so busy that silence is something you're running from? The power of knowing and understanding will come in those moments that we are willing to pause. I actually write down my pause moments. I don't just take it for granted that they're going to happen. I actually plan them just like I plan a meeting. So when we talk about pausing, how do you become intentional about focus? Focusing your faith, staying on point with your purpose. It starts with, are you willing to pause to get full direction? Or is busyness your default and it's actually fueling your distraction? How do you spend the first 30 minutes of your day? Do you spend it actually seeking instruction to start the day? Do you start it with a practice of taking a breath? Do you find the time to be able to settle in and get grounded so that you're able to move forward and move faster? Because endurance requires strength, and we can't fight the enemy if we're exhausted. So we have to pause. The second is process, and that's where the work begins. Are you willing to actually process what is causing the distraction? What is so important that it's pulling you away from your plan, your preparation, and your purpose? Why is that distraction continuing to show up? Are you willing to actually ask yourself those questions and do the work that's necessary to unpack where it's coming from? Broken cycles can hold us hostage. And it's not paying attention to the broken cycle that keeps us stuck. So, are you willing to pause and then process what's keeping you in a cycle that's no longer serving you? And then the third is create your plan. Whether it's a calendar that you're going to intentionally use to be able to plan out your next steps, not everything, not thinking about how can I possibly do that when this isn't working. I'm actually talking about just the next right thing. Creating a plan that's intentional, and this might sound strange, but starts off with small steps. What kind of small intentional steps can you begin to use to build momentum for the direction He's taking you in? And when you're planning, it has to become visual. Whether it's a calendar or it's a pursuit card that you've written, your action step on, and then you hold yourself accountable to looking at it every day and restating it to yourself, so that you're rewiring your system, you're rewiring the truth that you tell yourself, you're rewiring your intention so that your target remains crystal clear. So when I get questions like, how do I stay focused? Or how can I remain intentional? Or even, how can I find the time to stay in the Word? It starts with, are you willing to pause? Are you willing to process? And what's your plan look like? It starts here in time where you're willing to actually do the work.